Hi, my name is Jim Mosquera, and I'm the author of the Chandler Scott thriller series. The series consists of 4 books: 2020, Rebellium, which is what we're going to be talking about today, Division, and Hope. It's a political thriller series fraught with economic crisis, cyber terror, kinetic terror, with a journalist as protagonist. I'm also the author of the Escaping Oz series, dealing with economic crisis, financial crisis, government, and lately, politics. A little more about me. I came to the United States many years ago from the Republic of Panama. Yes, the place with the canal. We settled in St. Louis, Missouri, in the heartland of the United States. Academically, I pursued an engineering education. I have 2 degrees in industrial engineering, a bachelor's and a master's. Curiously enough, though, when it came time for my first real job, I elected to go into telecommunications and technology, which had nothing directly to do with what I had just studied. Nevertheless, my engineering background was a very good foundation for getting into that field. It was an exciting time to get into telecommunications and tech. It was the birth of the internet. So there were a lot of interesting projects that came about being part of the internet revolution during that time. I had a hankering, though, an urge for more knowledge. The knowledge that I thirsted for came from the financial markets. I began a pursuit of study of economics and the financial markets and trading. I tried to achieve and successfully achieve my Series 3 license, which allowed me to be a commodity trading advisor in the United States. I traded for my own account as well. I began writing for a national publication called Examiner.com, and I did that for a while. Then I published my own newsletter as well. That led to the publication of my first book, mentioned it earlier, part of the Escaping Oz series. I published that in late 2010. A little bit more about me. I was very involved in competitive sports as a youth and even into my early adulthood. But of course, at some point in time, that changes, and we have to find other outlets, for our competitive desires. So I do a lot of exercising nowadays, and as you'll shortly see, I find some different ways to satisfy that particular urge. So you might ask, what's the inspiration for writing the Chandler Scott thriller series, or Rebellium for that matter? As I mentioned earlier, I started with nonfiction writing first, talking about the economics of the United States, the financial markets, and so forth. And I began to see fissures in our economic and financial system. So then what I thought was, what if there's a way to create a story, a believable story, a near-term story, for depicting what might happen in the United States with these economic and financial forces coming to bear, and how that would affect us socially and politically. The world and the United States has undergone a multi-year transition, primarily due to economic conditions. We saw it in the stock market, housing, and our money. This transition ultimately asserted itself in politics. What happens when internal unrest tugs at the very heart of government and rebels against authority? What happens when some part of society decides to drop out and they facilitate their departure through technology? How will the battle between liberty and authority play out in person and in cyberspace? Before we talk about Rebellium, I think it's important to understand the backstory, or the predecessor novel, which is 2020. I should also point out that when I wrote 2020, and Rebellium for that matter, I wrote them both before the U.S. presidential election of the year 2016. I mention that because people often ask me, did you model the characters in the book 2020 or Rebellium after any characters or politicians that we might see in the United States today or recent years? And my answer was no. It was really more to craft what I saw a developing story and then build some characters into it. But in the novel 2020, which is based on the U.S. presidential election of the year 2020, again fictionalized, the president makes a historic decision based on the outcome of the 2020 election. Sounds familiar? However, this decision created a great deal of civil and political unrest within the United States. It's at that point that the novel Rebellium starts. At the conclusion of the novel 2020, as I mentioned before, the president makes a historical decision, a decision which causes political and civil unrest in the country. Chandler also finds himself somewhat in the middle of that decision based on the fact that he had to report something that was unpopular. It was also unpopular within the network where he worked, an international news network called El Mundo. Now he was out of a job, and he needed to figure out what he was going to do next. So he was sitting at home with his girlfriend when the phone rings. And prior to that phone ringing, they were talking about what they were going to do with the rest of their lives. Chandler now had the opportunity to go work maybe wherever he wanted to, and had the opportunity to start thinking about a life with his girlfriend. Well, that phone call changed everything. This phone call came from a voice he hadn't heard from in a long time. The gentleman's name, Arturo Dutari, a Panamanian, a very accomplished independent journalist who always seemed to be scooping a lot of international news organizations on these stories. Chandler admired him from afar, and they had a little bit of a working relationship. So he gets this call from Arturo, also named Artie, and Artie makes him an offer that's very compelling. Artie says, now that the country is in civil and political turmoil, again based on some decisions that the president made at the end of the 2020 election, and other factors as well, that he wants to create a documentary where Chandler and Artie would basically go figure out what was going on with these secession groups, these patriot groups, and otherwise people that were maybe causing problems for the authorities. Chandler knew that if he took that assignment, that it would cause problems with his girlfriend. And at the same time, he knew that it was such a great journalistic challenge for him that he really was forced to take it. Needless to say, that did not sit well with his girlfriend, and that sets up an ongoing tension between them, very severe tension, throughout the course of the novel Rebellium. One of the first things that Artie does is he creates a meeting, he sets up a meeting with an organization called the Honor Brigade. Now, the Honor Brigade is what you would consider a patriot group, but they're not a patriot group necessarily interested in dethroning the United States government. In many instances, they would like to help the government. Perhaps sometimes the government doesn't necessarily want their help. So Chandler and Artie meet with one of the leaders of the Honor Brigade. During the course of that meeting, they also discovered that there are elements of the Honor Brigade that I think the Honor Brigade has gone too soft, and they have more radical ideas about what they would like to do to the government. That was a very telling meeting for Chandler because it showed him, at least within one group, some things that were developing in the country. The next meeting, though, was very, very interesting, and this was set up by Chandler's mentor, Axel Schultz, a Renaissance man, someone very accomplished, but somebody that took Chandler under his wing many years in the past. And the good thing about Axel is not only is he an accomplished intellectual person, but he also has a lot of contacts based on the fact that he has this newsletter writing business. And oftentimes he himself scoops some organizations on the news front as well. Now his writing is mostly focused on financial literacy and financial information. But nevertheless, Axel sets up a meeting with a group called the Five Tribes. And in particular, they have a very charismatic and let's say a digital leader, because he only appears in digital form on the internet, on video screens, to his acolytes. And this creates a tension with Artie and Chandler's mentor Axel, because one of Axel's conditions was that the meeting that occurs with this Five Tribes organization is only Chandler and Axel. Well, this causes tension with Artie because it's Artie's documentary after all. And again, this is a tension that also exists throughout the remainder of the novel. When they go meet the Five Tribes, they meet their charismatic leader, Quinque. Again, they don't meet him in person. And he appears as somebody that you can just see the back of his head, and he looks like he's in an executive chair. And prior to actually meeting this Quinque character, they encounter people that are wearing Guy Fawkes masks, if you haven't seen those before. They look sort of like this. And after they meet Quinque, the Five Tribes leader, they discover a number of things that the government has kept secret, if you will, from people, how they manipulated social media, and how they've created these honeypots, if you will, for some of the patriot groups. So he's a very, very interesting character that appears in this novel and will also appear in subsequent novels as well. One of the next big things that happens in the novel is that Artie acquires a video from a government whistleblower. I won't go through all the details of how Artie actually acquires that video, but let's say it was through very, very unconventional means, and he doesn't even know who gave him the video in the first place. When they watch this video, Artie and Chandler, one of the things they discover is that this whistleblower has these just heinous accusations that he's making against the government. The problem with these accusations is the whistleblower is on video, he is disguised, and his voice is disguised also. So they don't really know what to make of this whistleblower, but they also know they're not going to risk their journalistic reputation just on a video. So Artie suggests that the only way of actually making this happen in terms of verifying what this whistleblower is saying is to actually be undercover, if you will, to discover whether what this whistleblower is saying is actually true. Artie doesn't really know how they're going to accomplish that, and it's a pretty daunting task because of what they would have to accomplish. Axel, again being the Renaissance man, comes up with a plan. And his plan is worked out in conjunction with this, I call them a Robin Hood cyber group. They're hackers, and they are called Omni. Axel has a very unique relationship with Omni. As I mentioned before, Axel writes financial newsletters, but he's also used Omni in the past very discreetly to get certain sources of information that perhaps isn't available to others. But again, his relationship with Omni is somewhat tenuous. It's not always consistent because, again, they are a hacker group. But I say they're a Robin Hood group because Omni is a friend to some and actually a foe to others. So depending on who Omni likes and don't like, that's how they play. So Axel crafts this plan for Chandler to be undercover, let's say. And he's undercover in a government installation. I won't give you any more details beyond that. But throughout the course of several weeks there, Chandler discovers something that is quite terrifying, if you will, on how the government is dealing, I guess, with some of these secessionary elements and some of these political dissidents, people that are otherwise, let's say, unhappy with what the federal government is doing. And it's a discovery that is so shocking to Chandler, something he's never experienced before. And again, he's covered many stories worldwide in his career, but this was something very unique. It was something that could potentially tear at the fabric of what is the United States. And it might shock the founding fathers of the United States as well to know that something like this was occurring. But at the same time, Chandler also knows and understands that there are probably a significant number of elements in the country, a large part of the population, that would wholly agree with what he saw, and others that would not. So the issue then becomes, well, once Chandler discovers this information, what does he do with it? Does he release it? How will it impact the country? Will it impact the country even more adversely than the political and social situation that exists at the time? Moreover, during the discovery of this information, Chandler's life and his well-being is greatly in danger. So how does he extricate himself from the danger that he's in? Will his mentor, Axel, be around to help? What sort of forces are going to be able to rescue Chandler, if you will, from this predicament that he finds himself? What's going to happen with Chandler's girlfriend? What happens to their relationship? So these are some of the things that are developed during the course of Rebellium. Another thing that happens is with his partner, Artie. I mentioned the tension earlier that existed with Axel and Artie, and then it also developed with Chandler. And they make a very interesting discovery about Artie, about who he really is. So these are all factors that play into not just the development of the documentary, but what Chandler will actually put in this documentary and how it will be released. Who will buy the documentary? Should he release it? Should he release it all its entirety? What sort of impact will it have on the country? Given what I said earlier, some will embrace it and some will reject it. Well, so that's the elements, if you will, and the basic storyline behind the novel Rebellium. Rebellium is a compelling story. It's a realistic thriller set in the United States, a United States that's troubled by social, political, and economic strife. I think the readers will connect with the alarming plight of Chandler's work and his discoveries. This is a tale of liberty versus authority. But instead of devolving into the fascism with which history is dotted, I introduce a subtle, more benign form. It's sinister in its approach, and many segments of the public do not understand it. Creating this awareness has been the role of journalism, yet we've experienced an abdication by this profession of their responsibility to inform society, objectively. What I've done is to fuse historical events with a near-term look at the future. My goal is to make the reader ponder if these events can happen. In fact, some of the storylines have come to life since the time I published them. There are a number of dimensions for the reader to consider: politics, financial crisis, cyber terror, crypto money, mentorship, and love. Thank you for spending a few minutes with me today to learn about Rebellium and the rest of the Chandler Scott thriller series. I hope you enjoy your time at the International Dublin Writers Festival. I have no doubt that Lawrence and his team have put on a great show for you. Thank you and enjoy the rest of your day.